Good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us on VIFF Connect. My name is Kyle Fossner, and I'm the Executive Director of VIFF. I'd like to start by giving thanks to the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations for their continued stewardship of the ancestral and occupied lands on which we live and work. VIFF is committed to honoring the land and its stewards by collaborating with and supporting Indigenous artists, filmmakers, curators, and audiences. Celebrating showrunners, directors, writers, producers, and craftspeople, the VIFF Talk series brings you the very best key creatives working today. Whether they're responsible for critically acclaimed films or groundbreaking TV series, our guests provide a treasure trove of information and inspiration for fellow creators and, of course, the fans. The VIFF Talk series is supported by CreativeBC, and our community broadcast partner is Telus. This year's talks will take us behind the scenes of some incredible films, including The Many Saints of Newark, My Name is Polly Murray, The Green Knight, Suicide Squad, Flee, and Stories That Transform Us. We'll also look at fantastic small screen works like Mayor of Easttown, Rutherford Falls, Family Law, and British Columbia, An Untold History. A very warm welcome to our guests and to our audiences. Enjoy the show.
Hello, everyone. My name is Brishkay Ahmed, and I am an Afghan-Canadian filmmaker and your host for this evening. I'd like to start by giving thanks to the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations for their continued stewardship and for the unceded and occupied land on which we live and work. Tonight's talk is sponsored by CreativeBC. And now I would like to welcome our special guest, Jonas Poher Rasmussen, the writer and director of the acclaimed documentary, Flee. Welcome, Jonas.
Thank you so much.
So welcome, Jonas. Wow, such a powerful film. For me, watching it, as an Afghan, I had maybe a different experience from someone who's not from Afghanistan, but even I learned a little bit more about my own country as well. Now, when your film first screened in Sundance, and now there's been a big transition in Afghanistan, I'm curious, first of all, to know how are you doing? How is Amin doing?
Well, I mean, we're doing well, but of course it's been heartbreaking to see how history has repeated itself. And, some sequences in the film, the sequence where Amin flees Afghanistan, I've worked on it personally for, weeks and months.
Really?
And then to all of a sudden see those same images in the news is just, heartbreaking. And, I'm in almost daily contact with him, and he's been very affected by everything that has happened because, he could see how all of a sudden, a new generation of Afghans getting pushed out of the country and is going to be in the same limbo he was in for years and not being able to choose their own path in life. So it's just heartbreaking to see.
Yeah, it must have been a completely unexpected events. This was not something that while you were making your film, when it screened, you ever thought would happen in the midst of this film. I mean, it makes the film even more necessary and relevant to watch and to understand. But I'm sorry that this is the circumstance for Amin and for your film and for Afghanistan as well. But let's dig deeper into the creation of Flee. Our audience will have an opportunity towards the end, maybe for 10 or 15 minutes or so, to share some questions with you as well. So, I want to know, first of all, and I think our audience wants to know, tell us how you got access to Amin's story and the timeline of that relationship and how that relationship became Flee, because you're both in the film. Yeah.
So I personally met Amin when I was 15 years old, and he arrived to my little Danish village. And he was 16, and he arrived all by himself and stayed in foster care with a family just around the corner from where I lived. And he learned Danish incredibly fast. Danish is not an easy language, but he learned it very fast. And we started meeting up every morning at the bus stop, going to high school, and slowly became very good friends. And then this is, of course, now 25 years ago. And of course, already back then, I was interested in how and why he had come to Denmark, but he just didn't want to talk about it. And I, of course, respected that. But I was, being his friend, I was, of course, curious about what had happened. But then many years passed, and I have a background in radio documentary.
Right.
And I think like 15 years ago, I asked him if I could do a radio documentary about his story.
Right.
And he said no, and he said that he wasn't ready to share his story. But he said that he knew he would have to tell his story at some point, and when he was ready, he would like to tell it to me. So of course, I again respected that, and years passed again, and 8 years ago, I was invited to this workshop in Denmark called Anidocs, which is a workshop that an animation school in Denmark does, where they combine animators and documentary filmmakers and ask them to kind of develop ideas for animated documentaries. And they asked me if I had an idea, and I didn't thought about, okay, but maybe this is the way to tell his story, to tell him his story. And I called him up and asked him if he would want to tell his story, but as an animated documentary. And he finally said yes. And he had kind of decided already that he was ready to share his story. And by doing it animation, and we could make him anonymous, was actually a big help for him, because, you know, these are very traumatic experiences that he was going to share for the very first time. And the fact that he wouldn't have to kind of face people in the street who had seen the film and then would have to small talk about things that are very traumatic to him was a big help for him to kind of feel, okay, but this is the way to tell the story.
Right. Yeah. And there's more than one secret, right? There's the secret of, I don't want to reveal too much about the film, but there's two secrets. There's culture clashes in two different ways that he struggles with, right? Yes. I can understand there are many layers. You cannot reveal his identity. But when I noticed at the end of the film, I don't know why I was surprised to see that the writing credit goes to screenwriters, both of you. It's at Jonas and Amin. And I guess I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was surprised. So I'm kind of curious to know, because what is that like? Because you've had the experience of working in radio and being a filmmaker, and then someone who's, an intellectual academia. That's what I got a sense of from the film. Yeah. How did you work together and make this 25-year relationship, this years of family secrets and personal identity secrets and things, into 90 minutes? How did that come about?
Well, in the beginning, it was just, starting the conversation. I didn't know anything. So it was about opening up. And in the beginning, it was very open. And I told him, now we're just going to see if this works, So we started the first interviews, and he knew that he could always say stop, and he could always pause.
Right.
Just to kind of create a safe space where he felt, okay, but this is a place where I can be totally open and free. And I told him, if you feel like, okay, but this isn't going to work, we'll stop and we won't make the film. So I think in the beginning it was just to make like a safe space for him where he felt, okay, but we're going to try this out and see what works. And then, he started sharing his story, and I recorded the whole thing. And I did, I think, between 15 and 20 interviews during the course of 3 or 4 years.
Did you say 15 and?
Between 15 and 20 interviews, yeah.
Wow, okay.
Yeah. And I would then transcribe everything and kind of organize the material, because this is a story that takes place during more than 30 years. So there's so many stories. So you need to kind of figure out, okay, what's my path through all this? So it was really about organizing the material. And then Amin was a big part of, whenever I had done a script, he would read through it and see if I had done some false conclusion, or if there were some factual errors, or if I had taken things out that he felt like it's really key to understand his story. And then we would have conversations throughout about the script. And the same thing, when we did the rough edits, he would watch it and again kind of give comments. So the fact that we both have a writing credits is because, first of all, of course, it's his story. Mm-hmm. But he's always also been very involved in the process of actually making the storyline of it.
Yeah, I found it really interesting that your voice is in the film, right? Yeah. So how was that? Allowing that option of including your voice into that film. Did you struggle with that choice? Like, no, I don't want my voice in it. Do I have to have my voice in it? That must have been a creative choice as well.
Yeah, but quite early in the process, I kind of realized, okay, but this is yes, it's a refugee story. It's a story about someone doing a journey from Afghanistan to Denmark, but it's also a story about a friendship. It's also the story about keeping secrets. You in order to kind of really understand him keeping secrets, he needs to keep them for someone, and that's me in this kind of case. So quite early in the process, I realized, okay, I need to be a character in here because it's also about friendship, and it's very much so about relations and what it does to someone to not being able to be honest to your past, and what it does to all the relations you have. Because when you're not able to be honest, you kind of keep people at a distance. You always kind of have people like in an arm's length away from you because you don't want to expose yourself. So very early in the process, I knew that I needed to be a part of it as well.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed like hearing your voice and hearing his, and knowing that this friendship is what allowed for this creation to come and be shared with an audience. Without your friendship, it wouldn't have been. I'm also very curious about your choice of animation, not in the sense that I understand very clearly in terms of protection for the identity. I understand that. But, a lot of people would say that, oh, animation is narrative or it's fiction. But in fact, in your film, what I noticed was that the animation actually is more truthful to the story, because there's little details like the necklace and the sitting up. You always tell him to sit up. So tell me about those little choices. How did you come up with making those creative choices of having him slide up the chair to sit up to make us more in the room with him, making the necklace animation a big part of the story, things like that?
Authenticity was really key. This thing that you hear the real voice behind animation. So just how do we show people that this is real? So in the very beginning of the film, I recorded the whole thing. I also had, video material of the whole thing. So this thing about him kind of getting into place and, the clapperboard and everything, it's in the material. So I thought, okay, but because it's animation, there's the danger that people will kind of say, okay, but this is fiction. So I really wanted to put as many things in there I could to kind of show people that this is not fiction. This is real. There's a real person behind the animation. So we put in these little things to kind of make it feel authentic. And authenticity is really like a key word throughout the process of making the film.
Yeah. No, it comes across, I think, that even if you see somebody on video, the little details in the animation makes me feel like I'm more in the room with him and I'm having a conversation with him. So the other interesting fact that I was thinking about was it strange when you were recording him on these tapes? I saw some interviews where you talked about using a technique, like some kind of it's almost like a meditative technique. Mm-hmm. You talked to us about why you did that.
Yeah, well, it basically comes from my background in radio, and it's a technique of interviewing that because in radio you don't have an image. So you need your subject to be really descriptive, to really paint a picture for the audience. So that's why in the film, for the interviews, he's laying down, he has his eyes closed, and he talks in present tense. And what this does is when he's there and he starts remembering things, I asked him to be really descriptive. For example, in the beginning of the film, he's in his childhood home in the garden, and his sister is there. And he's telling stories about the father. And that's, kind of the storyline. But then I would ask him, okay, but what did the garden look like? What kind of plants were there in the garden? What were the colors on the wall? What did the house look like? And what this did is, it gave the animators a lot of information to kind of draw from, to kind of design all the environments. But what it also did is kind of bringing him back there because he's laying down, has his eyes closed, and he's thinking about all these things and being very kind of physical about what things look like. And all of a sudden, like memories start to roll, he would start remembering things he didn't remember before. And he would kind of relive the thing instead of just retelling it. And it takes him on a journey and also us as the audience on the journey.
So now I understand why they were like, his delivery was so in the moment and authentic and conversational, like even the breaths that he takes in between. Now I understand. It's your approach in your conversations with him that led to that. What a goldmine that would have been for the animators. It really was.
Yeah. It really was, and also, you know, the animation director, he also had access to the video material. So sometimes when he felt like, okay, I need to just figure out like what little facial expression does it do here to kind of show the emotion he goes through. So they could kind of use that as a reference throughout the process of making animation as well.
Well, that's a great technique. I'm sure from now onwards, anybody doing podcasts and radio sort of docs, and they're going to use that technique. So the other interesting element that I saw, like we often see films that are just purely animation or, you know, not animation, but you have these very critical archival footage that you insert in between, right? Did you find that archival material prior to the animation, or was it after the animation? Did one play a role in the creation of the next?
It was a really long process. You know, in the very beginning, when I kind of did all the interviews and started doing the script, I started looking just myself, you know, on YouTube and finding tips here and there. And then the further we went, I realized, okay, but I need to dig deeper. And we had like access to a lot of different archives in Europe and over here in North America. And some things I found on YouTube, and I couldn't figure out who was the owners of the credits, so I would have to find something else. So I think it was a long process, and we didn't clear the last archival footage until the very end of the process. So it was throughout the process we were always kind of looking for new archive, but it also did, because, you know, it was also research for the visual style of the film, because sometimes we could take things from the archive and copy and put directly in the animation. So because we wanted to feel, you know, seamless going back and forth between animation and archive footage. So sometimes we just for research, we had like a shot of something and said, okay, but if we can use as reference for our animation, for our animators as well.
Yeah. But I remember when I was watching the scene of the Moscow with the McDonald's opening in Moscow, that, you know, the animation of that, like the archival footage of that, and then you seamlessly go into the animation and you recreate it. So it's like you stepped into that world. Was that specifically because you wanted people to be aware of the fact that we are watching a real story all the time?
Yes, definitely. It was a thought from the beginning that I wanted, like, throughout the film, have points where you see archival footage, so you're reminded that it's a real story, and also get the understanding that the reason Amin is on this journey, that the reason he's fleeing, is because of historical events. It's because of things that happen in the real world, and, you know, a lot of things in the film is actual footage from places he were, you know, because he remembered being at the opening at the first McDonald's in Moscow.
Yeah.
So, you know, it was kind of like, okay, but we can look for that archive footage, and we found the archive footage. So he would maybe be in the crowd somewhere, you know?
Yeah.
And also with the sisters being in the container going to Sweden, you know, we had a date for when they arrived, when this container arrived in Sweden, so we could look for archive material. So, and also the prison in Estonia. So it was really like being precise on finding these things that are historical events where he participated somehow, and putting it in there. So you always have the feeling that this is always kind of based on the world we live in.
Yes. The container scene is heartbreaking. But you know what? You're right about that, because because it's such a great film and the animation is so great, and, you know, the characters are interesting. You can slip into, wow, this is so entertaining. I'm enjoying myself watching this film. And then the archival comes in, and it does sometimes. It's like it shakes you, where you're like, oh my God, this happened to people, real people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Real human beings went through these things, and they're still going through it. But yeah, that was a very, very, you know, necessary, like it became a necessary choice for your film. It was just, you know, it was great. But it must have taken a long time to find all those archives.
But it did. It was like, it took from the very first idea till the film was done, took almost 7 years. And, you know, throughout the process, I was always kind of looking for archive. So it's been, like, I've been looking, you know, on just online, whatever I can find online, but also, you know, diving into archives in different TV networks and figuring out what was there. Because there's not a lot of archive, you know, from Afghanistan in the 80s and Moscow in the 90s. And so it was a big job, but luckily we had some amazing people helping us.
So of the 7 years, how long were you in editing?
I think we were in editing for like 6-7 months.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
And was there a part in the film that took you longer to edit because maybe it was more difficult? Like the Moscow segment seems quite, traumatic and difficult. Was there any part where Amin needed a bit of time to process that edit process, or you needed it?
No, but I mean, definitely, I did those 15, 20 interviews during the course of 3 and 4 years. And that was also because some things Amin had a hard time talking about. And he said, I can't talk about this now, or can we wait a little bit? And then maybe a year would pass and we would go back and we would kind of try to dig a bit deeper. And sometimes we would sit in the editing room and being editing, and we would have some new questions for him. And I would ask him, is it okay if I pop by and we do a new interview?
Right.
So it was like a process, like kind of a fluid process of editing and creating the story at the same time.
That's so interesting. It's like you're getting to know your film, but you're also in many ways getting to know your friend.
Yeah, but definitely.
The same process.
Yeah.
Then I have to ask you, does Amin look like the same Amin to you at the end that he did in the beginning?
If he's changed in my...
To you, yes, like your relationship or you with him,
I don't think, I think we've definitely become closer in this process of making this film, even though we were very close friends even before. But just the fact, that he let go, and because he doesn't have to hide things anymore, he's more he feels more free, and that of course it's just it has changed him, definitely, to kind of let go of these things. And for myself, it just made me appreciate where I grew up and my home even more. This thing about that you have to grow up as a place where you feel safe, and that you have a home where you don't have to move on it just made me appreciate that a lot more.
Yeah. Now, I found the relationship of Amin and Casper, I think, right? Is it husband Casper? Really interesting. Yeah. And Casper seems like such a wonderful soul, Was Casper involved at all in the later phase of the film coming together? I know obviously in the earlier phase when Amin was talking to you, he wasn't, because he didn't know, and we can see that in the film as well, that Casper doesn't know that there's the communication that's going on between you two. Did Casper ever come in at some point in the film and understand what's going on?
No, not till the very end. But of course, in the process, when Amin started opening up to me, he also started telling things to Casper. So it was kind of, for him, it was like a double relief of kind of, okay, now the story's out there and now I can talk about it more freely. And he started to talk about it with him, and every day, starting sharing a lot more with Casper. So I think the process of getting the story out there also kind of was the process of getting closer and closer to Casper.
That's interesting. Yeah, I really, I learned a lot about the relationship of the two of them, your relationship as friends. Now, the other thing that, for me, the sound was just really interesting. All the different music, like the Aha and the Walkman, and then the Bollywood, things into it. So was those reveals in you and Amin's conversations early on in the recording, or did you have to sort of dig and do some research and find that out yourself?
No, that came very early on. The very first interview, when I started to talk to him, I asked him, what's your very first memory? And very, very fast, he started to talk about this pink Walkman he had that one of his sisters had given him. And he then started talking about the music he would listen to. And I was surprised that was the same kind of pop music I listened to. Yeah. He really enjoyed listening to Aha and Roxette and Madonna and Whitney Houston and all these things that I had also listened to. Which I thought, okay, but if this is a surprise to me, then it probably also will be for the audience. So I thought, okay, we need to bring this soundtrack from his Walkman into the film. And the same thing goes for these Bollywood cards. It's these kind of collective cards that you kind of you can swap and and he was telling me that his sisters had all these cards, and he also started to have them, but he only liked to have, the male stars as his sisters, where his brothers kind of had all the female Bollywood stars. So yeah. So I just thought, okay, we need to have this as an element in the film as well.
Yes, and it's very accurate because I had the Shami Kapoor and Anil Kapoor cards. My older sister had them. We were big fans of it, and I think maybe that it's those little details that is revealed about Afghanistan and Afghan people and what our country was. We were obsessed with Bollywood, and also we were obsessed with Western cowboys at the same time as well. But that really rung true to me because it was. So I was quite fascinated by that. Yeah. And then Aha, of course, Now, the other thing, when did the necklace was very special for me when I was watching the film. At what point did Amin reveal sort of, the necklace, and when did you decide yes, I'm going to bring that storyline element into the film because it's attached to his identity of being a gay man, which is very taboo in Afghan culture and, in our sort of, traditional culture. Yeah. So was that a sort of a struggle to make decisions on that storyline?
No, it wasn't really. Like when he told the story, and I just thought it was a beautiful kind of gesture of this boy he met in the back of his truck to give this necklace, and just to have this memory of a special connection he had with someone in a very short moment of time, but in a very important moment of time, to just have this kind of physical proof of it. So when he told the story, I was kind of okay, but this needs to be in there somehow. So the whole story of him being gay, I felt like, but it's kind of similar to the story of him not being able to share his past. Right. He's always been hiding something. So when he was a kid and a young man in Afghanistan, he felt like he couldn't be honest towards his sexuality. He couldn't be honest to who he was really. And then when he arrived in Denmark, he could be openly gay, but he couldn't share his story. He couldn't share where he came from really. So this thing about he's always had to hide something away. Yeah. So those two stories really intertwine, and I thought, okay, but we need them both in there because this is not just a refugee story. It's really a story about, someone looking in a place in life where he can be who he is with everything that entails. And I think that's something that most people can relate to at some point in your life. You're looking for that place where you can be truly who you are. And that's really what the story is about. Yes, it's a refugee story, but it's also a story about family and sexuality and friendships and all these things that makes him, I think, more human than the general kind of image you get of refugees in the media.
No, but I mean, I think that's why this film is important because, refugees are humans. Yeah. And humans, we have families and we fall in love and we have challenges and there are things we're afraid of to express. And so that's where the beauty comes in the universality of the film, which I really appreciated because I'm very bored of actually people just being referred to as refugees, even that, just a human,
Yeah, exactly. And also because, being a refugee, it's not an identity. It's a period of time in your life where you experience something horrible and it can, it can affect you for the rest of your life, but that's not who you are. And there's so many other things. Right? And each one of those more than 80 million people who are refugees right now have, a full life of feelings and hopes and dreams and all these things. I think it's just important to kind of give those 80 million people a human face.
Yeah, and we can see that in your film because although Amin arrives as a refugee, his trajectory of life, he falls in love, he meets a great partner, he has great opportunities that come up for him, and he, moves off into a different chapter, right?
Yeah.
So that's in many cases that's it's hopeful to see that. I hope that people are in the situation. They can see this film a little bit also. But we have just a few minutes before we're going to go into questions. But I'm kind of curious to know that, at 16 years old, as we started this conversation, you're that boy that's standing in the bus stop and you notice that there's this other boy who speaks Danish well, but he's just learned it really well. Why did you want to be his friend? Was it what kind of a 16-year-old were you that you were so open to welcoming him and being friendly?
Well, different reasons. One reason is when you grow up in a very small village,
right?
you can't just pick and choose. Like whatever boy is around, that's who you hang out with. But you know, I really fast really fast had a great connection. And also I think because, you know, we had some of the same cultural references, and we love pop music, we love watching films, these things that, you know, when you're 15 years old and live close by, kind of, okay, let's hang out, let's watch a film, let's talk about music. And what really drew me to him in the beginning, I think, was also because, you know, he was, the first time I saw him, he was so well dressed. Like he was really nice. Yeah, he was like, he had style, you know, and this was rural Denmark, and not a lot of people wore like stylish clothes, but he really did. And he just looked cool. So I was like, okay, I need to talk to this guy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in the film, we can see that he's always attracted to like good looking men and, you know, like stylish men, right? So he's kind of like, you know, copying and keeping himself in that same way. Well, that's really interesting. I assume that you probably knew that there was a mystery to him.
Yeah, definitely. Like there was this stories going around, you know, in high school, and people kind of made up this stories that he had walked all the way from Afghanistan to Denmark, and that he had seen all of his family getting killed. And I think some of them were based on, you know, the story he had been given by the human traffickers, and that some people maybe had heard, and then kind of, you know, because he didn't want to talk about it, like when you asked him, he said, I don't want to talk about it. And it was mostly because he didn't want to lie, you know, he didn't want to lie to anyone. So he just said, I don't want to talk about it. But because he had to tell someone, so some people somewhere kind of had some hints, and then there was just these stories going around. And of course, it makes you curious to have someone who has this kind of background.
Yeah, I would imagine, because it almost feels like this world of like crazy adventures for you from rural Denmark, like you said, who only gets to pick and choose your friends. There's this person in front of you that, you know, is like a storybook probably, right? Yeah.
And but of course, but it didn't really affect our relationship, you know. It was, I asked him, I think one time in the beginning, and then he said, I don't want to talk about it. And then, okay, I think also when you're 15 years old, you know, and you just, okay, but that's it, then just hang out, and that's it, you know, and then you kind of move on.
Yes. That's true. That's true. Yeah. There's like other things that occupy a teenager's mind, for sure.
Exactly. Yeah.
I get it. But still, I do sense that there is this like innate curiosity that you have probably towards humans in general that makes you like, you know, want to listen to their stories. And you mentioned that you have a background in radio, so it's like a lot of the stories. Before we get our questions, I noticed that Riz Ahmed is on board as a producer on your film. How did that come about? Because obviously you didn't expect this when you were starting your film, Sundance, the jury, the grand prize, TIFF, you know? So can you just walk us through that glory?
Yeah. No, it was quite late in the process that he came on board, and also Nicolai Costa-Waldau. And it was actually just before we had the premiere in Sundance, and my sales agent, or the sales agent of the film, kind of asked me, wouldn't it be an idea to have some big name actors and do like an English version of the film? So and in the beginning I was reluctant, because I think the film is really about, you know, the real voice behind the animation, and this authenticity that, you know, behind animation is a real person. And if you have someone else voice it, I was afraid that was going to disappear. But to her point was, but if you have someone like Riz Ahmed doing his voice, then it might reach an even broader audience. And this story is so important that if you can get it even further out, we have to do it. And I could, of course, see, okay, but yeah, she's got a point. So we tried to. Riz was our first pick from the very beginning. Like, we really will have him on board because he has a Pakistani background, which was and has kind of. And also because he really fights for representation, you know? Yeah. So to have him on board was really our first pick. And luckily through VIFF, who helped produce the film, we got in touch with him, and he saw the film and he loved it and said yes to EP it and also voice the American version. So that one's going to come out later after the original version comes out.
Okay. Did you ever ask him why he liked it? I mean, I understand why he liked it. He's very committed to human rights issues and, representation and all of that. I think that, having him on board amplifies the voice of people like Amin's story, which is at that time, like I said, you probably didn't know of the circumstance of today.
No, exactly. And I think it's just wonderful when someone like him and also Nikolai, kind of takes the film and says, okay, but this subject is important on so many levels and we need to bring it to a broad audience across the world.
Yes. And I have a good friend of mine whose 11-year-old and 12-year-old boys watch the film, and they're, Anglo-Canadian. So that's the beauty of your film, is that it's resonating with different demographics as well, right?
Yeah.
Because of the animation and all of that.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, I'm going to do like a small tour in Denmark on high schools, and I'm really looking forward to that, because I think that's really where you can make a change and have like young people watch it and start having these debates, both about refugees, but also about being gay, about these kind of marginalized people and how we can kind of embrace that instead of pushing them away.
Well, that's, what I think a lot of new refugees, kids who are in high schools, will probably appreciate it, because there's not going to be talk around the hallway that they climbed over Mount Everest. Shot, like, you know what I mean? Like that aspect that will be broken. So I know that in about a minute, we're going to go to a question, but I'm very interested to know if you are already starting another project, or are you exhausted right now from this one? What's the next? What can we expect from Jonas next?
I'm trying to start new projects. All of this hopefully is a little distracting, but in a very good way. It's amazing that the film gets an audience and travels. But I'm slowly starting to write. I have one project I'm writing on now, which is also an animation. It's not funded yet, so we're going to see if it's going to make it. But so I'm writing a new project, and hopefully later the year or early next year, I'll be able to kind of say some more.
That's so interesting that you're still sticking on with this new medium of animation, right?
Yeah.
You fell in love with it? Is that it? Like, what is it about animation that it seems like you found a new medium for yourself?
Yeah, no, I don't know. Like it was really an amazing process with the team I had to make this film. And, having a big team of artists who can kind of bring so many creative ideas and it was really amazing. And also I really like the process of, in animation, you edit before you start filming, which was amazing, because in the editing room, all of a sudden you could kind of, in a sense that you don't start animating until the edit is locked, because you do the edit with these rough storyboards. So in the editing room, you could kind of ask for the exact shot you wanted, and you weren't a slave of the material you brought back home from the shoot. So the process was very different, and I really enjoyed that.
A lot of creative freedoms.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Jonas, we have a question from our audience, and I'm going to read the questions out. We have a question that says, your interview style is quite unique. We see Amin laying supine with the camera suspended above him as if it were in therapy. Can you speak more about why you chose to do this and for what effect? I think we discussed this a bit early on, but maybe our audience member came in or logged in a bit later. But if you can.
Yeah, but it's really to kind of revive memories, like a way of kind of bringing him back to what really happened and kind of generate new memories. And I know it looks therapeutic. I'm not a therapist, but when we did the first interview, one of the first things Amin said to me was, I'm going to do this because it's going to be therapeutic to me. He hadn't told his story, so it was a therapeutic session. But it wasn't my intention from the beginning. The reason why he's laying down is really a technique of interviewing to kind of bring him back and kind of make him relax and really focus on his memories.
Yes. And, like we talked about earlier, that just became a goldmine for the animators, right? Yeah. Another question is, what was Amin's reaction to watching the film in full for the first time? So I'm assuming this is like, once music and everything has been put in, so it's like the whole story, not just a rough edit. What was his reaction?
He was very moved by it. He was very emotional. But he also said that he didn't know if it was because it was a good film, because, it's his story. So he would be emotional about it for many reasons. and he wasn't sure if it was because the story was well told. So to him, it really meant a lot when, the film finally premiered and he could see that people really reacted to it in a positive way. So he's very happy about the film.
Yeah, I can hear him saying that. Because he's a very intellectual academia kind of type, like in present day. So I can hear him saying, I'm not sure if I'm crying because the film is good or if it's my story, like the analytical.
Yeah, exactly.
I can hear that.
Yeah.
Another question that we have is your approach to editing was quite different in bringing it to the heart of the process rather than going into the editing room at the end and assembling the story. Can you talk more about why and how you did this?
Yeah. So it's really the process of making animation because, making animation it's very expensive because you have a big team of animators and artists to sit and draw every frame and every frame of the film. So before you start that process of making the animation, because you can't make, 20 hours of animation and then cut. So you need to first do the edit and be really certain, okay, but this is the locked edit. And we're not going to move anything around. So every shot is timed down to the very frame. And then animation starts because otherwise it's too expensive. And then you can really calculate, we had so many, Excel sheets of kind of how much time do we use on every image. So everything is calculated when we started the process of animation. And here the doing all the editing was really the cheap part because that's just me and an editor in a room spending a lot of time on trying to get the story to work. So it was really a great process because, as I said before, in the editing room, all of a sudden you could just ask a storyboarder, okay, but we need this close-up shot. Could you draw it for us? And then we would have it the day after, So we could always ask for the shots we needed to really create the scenes exactly how we wanted them.
Right, like just to make sure the pace and the mood and the essence is captured in there. Right?
Yeah, because normally when you do a shoot for a documentary, you go out and you shoot things and you're not really sure if you got everything, and then you start editing and you're, oh, damn, I'm missing this shot I'm missing the close-up shot. I didn't get close enough, or I don't have an overview of location. These things.
Yeah.
But here we could get everything.
Yes. So for our audience, then, if you're not doing animation, make sure you get a ton of coverage when you're filming.
Yeah.
But you have a little bit more freedom in the animation. But still, it's expensive, so you don't have that much freedom. Do you know what I mean? Because it impacts the budget when you're.
Yeah, I think my animation producers would kind of cross themselves if I said that doing animation gives a lot of freedom, because it doesn't. It does in the very specific process of making the animatic, because you can pick and choose, but otherwise it needs to be super tight to work because it's so expensive. And if you kind of change your mind in the process, it's not doable.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
Good. Another question coming up for you is, what drove your decisions to include or exclude certain parts of Amin's story?
Quite early in the process, I thought, okay, but this is a story about finding a home. So it was really trying to find the core of the story as early as possible in the process, and then figuring out, okay, what scenes from his life do I put in the film to kind of support this? Because I felt both what happened in his present day, that him and his boyfriend were looking for a house, and also, the flight from Afghanistan, being a refugee is basically losing your home and searching for a new place. So I thought, okay, but this story is really about home. So everything needs to kind of circle around that. So of all the material I had to kind of choose which one will support this core of the story. And of course, it is his story seen through my lens, and I chose the path I wanted to show. But of course, Amin was a part of the process all along, and it was super important to me that he felt that he could recognize himself in the story.
Yeah, and you mentioned that through the edit process and the decision of the story, Amin was always with you discussing what would or would not, he would not be okay with certain parts, right? So it was about a discussion with him.
Yeah. Like he read scripts. He also saw edits, and at some point I had taken out this part where he is in prison in Estonia, and I had taken that out, and he was like, "That doesn't make sense to me. That was the worst part of the process of fleeing, was being in a prison in Estonia for 6 months and not knowing what was going to happen. So if you take that out, I think that's really key to understand my story. And then we had like a discussion about it, and I okay, we'll try to put it back in, and then we figured out a way to put it back in. So we had those kind of conversations.
Right. I have to say that the conversation with him and Casper when they reach the house and what each are discussing is humorous. It's fantastic. Not to give out too much to the audience, but you know what it is. It's a typical relationship. One sees the world this way, one sees the world this way.
Exactly. Yeah.
We have another question also about your amazing soundtrack. Can you talk more about the soundtrack? Did you choose the songs, or did you have a music supervisor?
No, it was really me choosing the songs. Like, some of them are based on the playlist I kind of got from Amin, from his Walkman, what he listened to when he was in Afghanistan. And then some of the songs are really my choices. The Daft Punk song at the end. There's also these 2 songs by a band called Low Raw. One when they're on the ship, there's a song, and for the credits in the end was songs I chose. And then of course there's the entire score that's been made by an amazing composer in Sweden. But it's been, we didn't have a supervisor. It was me trying to figure out which songs to use, and it was the Daft Punk song. I knew from the very beginning that I wanted that for that sequence.
Really?
He told me the story, and I think a couple of days later I was just listening to music, and I thought, okay, but this is a song we need for that sequence, and it was so hard to get to them. Like we tried for 3 years.
And 3 years to license the song?
To get to them, to just get them to kind of look at it and kind of say if they would agree to use it or not. And I was actually, my producer was like, okay, but now you need to find something else. And I had started to talk with different other bands about that sequence. And then 1 week before my producer had kind of put a deadline on, we needed an answer for Daft Punk. They finally said, oh, we've seen it, looks beautiful. You can use it. And we got it really cheap and everything, and it was super sweet. But just to kind of get them, and that was like the biggest stone that kind of fell to my heart, because that song was, I needed that one.
So then, I guess it's like, just be patient, and you might get it, and you might even get it at a cheap price. But just be patient and try.
Yeah, I think patience is a good thing to have when you do documentaries.
Yeah. That's an inspiring story. I'm sure we'll all lean on that. We'll all lean on that for sure. Another question is the question is, how did you approach creating the film when you hadn't visited Afghanistan yourself?
Well, I was supposed to go actually. I went to Estonia, to where the prison he was in. I went to Moscow, to the area where he lived. I was also supposed to go to Kabul, but the hotel where I was supposed to stay got attacked, 2 weeks before I should go. So the Danish embassy called me and said it was a bad idea that I went.
Yeah.
And my wife was heavily pregnant, so she also thought it was a very bad idea to go. So I didn't go. So what we did was, spending a huge amount of time doing research, finding archive material from the time he lived there. Also going to libraries, finding books, finding photos. The art director, Jess Nichols, and I just spent a lot of time doing research and finding. And then we had a bunch of local Afghans in Denmark who we kind of sent material by, and they kind of said, okay, but we wouldn't have this kind of refrigerator, and we wouldn't have this kind of stove. So just to be really precise, we had like Afghan consultants who kind of helped us out to be as precise as possible.
Yeah, especially, in our Afghan culture, we are always sitting out in the yard, as you have in your film, for instance. Like, it's, being indoors when you have a beautiful backyard or front yard is just part of our life. You know what I mean? That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
But, I don't think that you have to go to Afghanistan to make a film about Afghanistan, because of the 30, almost 40 years of war. The Afghan diaspora is outside. So Afghanistan lives outside Afghanistan. The Afghan heart is beating outside Afghanistan.
So true. So true.
You know, so in that sense. So now that the film is done and, you know, we've really enjoyed your talk with us, I'm curious to sort of find out what are the next festivals your film is playing at? Where are you heading? We know you're going to the Danish. You're going to be doing a Danish school project. Where else will this film be going?
I am going to Mexico tonight, Guadalajara. And then I'm going to go back home for a couple of days. Then I'm going to London. And yeah, it's traveling a lot this next couple of months. So a lot of festivals here in North America, a lot of festivals in Europe, some in Asia as well. So it's getting out there, which is wonderful just to have it finally reached its audience, if it's virtually or in cinemas. It's just amazing that it's finally getting out there.
Well, I think your film has come at the right cusp in time, not just in terms of the political issue in Afghanistan, but I mean the world as well, in terms of other countries like Syria, Iraq and stuff, but also right at that cusp of time where the world is opening back to in-person screenings, but at the same time virtual. So I think, Jonas, your film is going to reach an incredibly broad audience, probably more than if we weren't in this obscure situation that we are.
Yeah, I really hope so.
Yeah. So I hope that your film has a lot more success. Now, you mentioned that your wife was pregnant when you were trying to get into Afghanistan. So hopefully you've had a baby by now.
Yes, I have. She's 7 now, so it's been a while.
It's been a while. Oh yeah, that's she's the making of the film.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we want to thank you very, very much, and I want to send a thank you to our audience. They all watched your film, I think, on October the 3rd, and I'm sure people will talk about it. I wish you lots of success, and Bisyo Tashakor, and tell Amin also.
I will.
Tashakor from me, which basically just means thank you, and Wafaq Boshin. Okay, and lots of success to you. So thank you for joining us. Have a good evening in LA.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me.